Hey guys, what's up? It's Connor Mitchell, head whiz of Dragon Rider Network, and yes, I am back again from a very long absence. I was in Chicago for about a week, and then I took a little bit of time off, and now I am making videos for these few days before I go off again for something else. So today I am here doing a review, but not just any review, a movie review. Now, I normally don't do movie reviews, but when I do, they normally relate, at least in the slightest, to technology, which this one does, and it is in fact the movie Jobs. Being that this is about the man who was easily the most influential man in the world of technology in the 20th and 21st century, I believe we owe him, and I owe him, some credit, at least enough to make this video review. And since I'm doing a movie review, I need to look the part. So what? Anytime you see a professional movie reviewer, they're always wearing some kind of jacket and a hat. At least the ones I watch. So anyway, let's get into it. God, man, I look good in this. I could definitely adopt this look. So anyway, I'm going to be breaking this review up into 3 sections. Number 1, storyline. Number 2, acting. And number 3 is going to be how things were executed. So anyway, let's go ahead and begin on storyline. So the tale begins with Steve Jobs starting his presentation at the Apple headquarters back in October of 2001 when he was introducing the very first iPod. Now, right off the bat, this threw me off a little bit because I expected them to introduce this part way later in the movie, because this is a part I saw as something that the movie would constantly be building up to, not something that it just puts right out there in the beginning and then all of a sudden goes back to his college years. Now, I'm no film director, but what I would have done is I would have had his beginning college years at the beginning and then worked up to that point, and then when it gets to his return at Apple, and of course after the Crazy One speech, then it would have in fact actual news footage of Steve Jobs introducing all of these products. I mean, Ashton Kutcher still could have done it, I guess, like for little bits in between, but for the most part, I think if they were to use actual news footage and those parts at the end, it would have been about 1,000 times more effective at showing how far he had come from the bottom of where he was to then all of a sudden how relevant he had become in our lives. But that's just me. The rest of the story continues with him in his college years working up to what will soon become Apple Computer Inc. The story of Apple Inc. ranges from the glorious days in the garage to the famous 1984 ad, to the firing of Steve Jobs, to then the rehiring of Steve Jobs in 1997. Now, I definitely thought that this movie showed the full circle of how Apple was in the executive side during Jobs' time, because you get to see how the board of directors obviously had great disdain for Steve Jobs' somewhat unorthodox way of doing projects, such as he had with the Lisa and the Macintosh. And at the same time, it also showed the people who were close to Steve, such as Steve Wozniak, Jobs' old girlfriend, John Scully, and, not to give too much away at the end, but a certain Johnny Ives also makes his appearance into the storyline. Now, coming from many, many other bad reviews that are spread across the web, I could easily see that people were expecting to learn a lot more about the personal Steve Jobs. I mean, the thing I noticed is that throughout, it seemed as though there were parts of Steve Jobs' life that were happening right in front of us, but weren't really explained. Such as the humongous house where Steve Jobs really had a bunch of empty rooms, where he kind of lived just on his own, the girlfriend's situation, and, just many other things that he was incredibly private about, but we really didn't learn any more about them from this movie, which was kind of a letdown. The reason, though, I believe this was done the way it was done was because you couldn't go too in-depth into either Steve Jobs and the company, because at that point you really couldn't go too far into either of them. So I'm figuring that from a point, it gave you just enough to know about Steve Jobs and how he handled the corporate side, not so much his personal side. Overall, though, I thought the storyline was actually really good, because at some parts you can actually spot out little Easter eggs throughout the film, such as the Pepsi-Cola ad on the TV, and of course Steve Jobs trying to work the CD player, which of course turns into the iPod later on. Next is acting. Obviously something I know so much about. I don't think it's incredibly wrong to say that when we were going out to see this movie, that we were only looking towards one guy to carry the load of acting, and that was Ashton Kutcher. In my mind, Ashton Kutcher didn't disappoint. I've seen Ashton Kutcher in some really crappy stuff. This was not one of them, and he did an amazing job of keeping the acting real enough and really convincing me, at least, that he could portray Steve Jobs in ways that we may have not imagined, but when he put it into that acting form, we could definitely see it for what it, in a sense, was. What I mean to say is that he was definitely great at being Steve Jobs when he would just go completely apeshit on his employees. That was the part that I was probably most impressed with Ashton Kutcher being able to handle. Just going into an office room with his employees, being Steve Jobs, and just going completely mental on every single one of them in ways that I think many of us didn't like to think of Steve Jobs as, but to a degree, it was him, and I believe that somehow he was able to pull it off quite well. Now understand, I would definitely not merit this as Oscar-winning material, but I think we can all admit that Ashton Kutcher did at least a halfway decent job of showing us that he wasn't a half-talented actor. He was actually pretty good in this, and I was quite impressed when I left the theater. So, my hat off to Ashton Kutcher. Finally, how are things portrayed and executed throughout the film? Now, throughout the entire film, I felt a personal connection with at least a few of the characters like Jobs and Wozniak, because you know those people from the real story, so you already have a bit of backstory on them already, and they're already quite favorable to you as a person. But what I really liked even more than just showing the human side of each of the top executives of Apple, what I truly loved was how it showed that Steve Jobs started off with his friends, and eventually he gets to the top, but in the process he loses all of his friends, and then later on he loses the company. Now, comparing it to a movie that was nominated at least for Oscar material, The Social Network, everybody in the film Jobs seemed as though they weren't the good guy, that everybody was the bad guy. And the reason I say this is because Jobs obviously kind of made out to be this pompous jerk. The board made to look like they single-handedly destroyed Apple. Jobs' friends all seemed to say, we don't want to be a part of this anymore, and then it just goes on and on and on. Same in the social network. Everybody seems to be in on the bit of the evil character. Nobody's really the good character. And much like the social network, might I add, everybody involved in the story claims it to be a great work of fiction, because I truly believe that nobody is portrayed the way they like. If they were portrayed in a much kinder light, I believe it would have been much more accepted by the people who were actually involved in the story. Now, to be fair, I know about as little as 99.9% of the people who saw the movie. So I will not argue with Steve Wozniak, who actually gave a full interview for Gizmodo on his opinion of the movie. So I'm not going to try and complain with him and say this part was true, this part was false. I don't know what happened. But I will say this. Whenever a movie comes out and it makes everybody look like the hero, you get very, very few complaints on those kind of movies in terms of accurate citing. But overall, as a whole movie, I thought it was a truly great film. I was incredibly impressed with it. I really did like it. And on my movie reviewer scale thing, I would give it an 8 out of 10. Because obviously there were some things like Steve Jobs' personal life, and obviously his kids, his wife, and how he got to where he was in Palo Alto. Some things obviously weren't expanded upon enough, and obviously they left out sort of the iPod, the iPhone, the iPad, and a little bit of the later ons, which I said they could have put in a newsreel at the end. But again, nothing's perfect. If you guys want to see it for yourself, go hit up your local theater and check it out for yourself. Wait until it comes out on Blu-ray, or if you're interested in getting it a little bit sooner and cheaper than the theater, if you live in New York City, just go to your local guy on the street corner. I'm sure he must have a pirated version of it by now. So anyway, guys, thanks for watching my review of the film Jobs. Make sure you subscribe to the channel for more tech content like this. Also, make sure you check out all of my social links down in the description below. Anyway, guys, I have been Connor Mitchell, and I will catch you guys in the next video. Oh! Almost forgot. Before I go, by the end of this week, I will be making a video explaining what's been going on the last few weeks and why there has been a lack of videos and why there will be a lack of videos going forward, at least for a few more weeks. And it will also detail the return of my videos, which is already to bust the rumors that I know are already circulating about that I am quitting the channel, because I am not quitting the channel. Alright? The tech content will be returning soon. In fact, I have a few videos lined up for this week just to get you guys hooked up before this little thing at the end of the week happens. So, news on that coming your way this Friday. So anyway, catch you guys then. Talk to you then.